Well, hello everyone. We are back for another episode, and I am proud to say that today's topic of conversation is peeing in the shower. Do alphas do it or not?
Yes.
Nah, really though. We are going through the sidebar series still, and the 104 post is how to compliment your wife and make her feel sexy. And I will say, when I wrote this post, this has been a back and forth for me. I remember first writing this and just kind of processing my own thoughts on some things that I was trying to learn and figure out at the time. And goodness, probably like a month after I wrote it, I looked back and said, that is probably one of the most shameful blue pill things I could have written. Why in the world would I have put that in there? And then for some reason, there's this weird trickle that started happening of, some of the more reliable endorsed contributors looking back to that post and quoting it and using it earlier in RPC's history. And so then I went back to it thinking that that was probably my biggest fail on the sidebar, and then reread it again as I continued to grow and learn and realized, okay, well, what I was doing was unintentionally bait and switching, because some of the concepts are extremely valuable, while at the same time put in a way that I guess it would be more of a lure for some guys who aren't quite ready to swallow the pill fully themselves yet, which is essential in early phase. But I guess the first thing that I would want to talk about, right? So I have in the beginning of that post, axiom 1 is when a woman feels sexy, her interest in sex goes up proportionately to how sexy she feels. What do you guys make of that? True, not true? Is that one of those things where you say, yeah, John, that really needed to get out of the sidebar, kick it out? Or is that something where you say, no, there's something to this?
Insofar as,
important.
Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
It's definitely important. I mean, self-image is everything. We know it as men, and even more so to a woman. When you feel confident, you act confident, and you're willing to act more on those things.
Yeah, I think that there's a certain degree of self-arousal in a way that happens when a girl gets all done up and does whatever she needs to do to get herself in a state where she feels like she is sexy and that she is attractive. And I think that you see this happen a lot when you have the girls on the town looking to go get them some. In the secular world, you see they get all of their nails done. They go through this entire printing process that takes a whole day, and by the time the end of the night comes around, if they didn't land some dude or get hit on like 27 times, then it was a complete failure and they feel bad about it because she felt sexy and she wanted to get some, and if she doesn't, then it was a waste. So I think that there's certainly a corollary there as far as the more she gets in that state of mind, the more she's interested in doing something about it.
Right. So, and I actually do have a corollary in the post, which the corollary 1 is feeling sexy and feeling beautiful or pretty are not the same. Tell me about that. Or do you disagree?
No, I agree. I mean, this is too much of a overstatement here, but I'm going to start with feeling sexy tends to be for guys. Like the women primp up and they get ready to attract men. Feeling beautiful is more about status and status signaling to other women. You can get some crossover between those two anyways, but I think generally speaking, the feeling beautiful thing is a much less, aggressive way of portraying themselves to the world. So I would make a distinction.
I think it's, if they feel pretty, it's more who I am. If they feel sexy, it's more
in the moment.
How I'm going to present myself. It's more action rather than how I see myself. It's more to get a result.
Yeah, I think that it's a behavioral thing, right? So, and I think guys pick up on this. If there can be a very beautiful woman who just based on her behavior and the way that she presents herself or whatever is going on inside her own thought, thought patterns, she may not strike you as sexy. I had a neighbor who was like this. We grew up together, and like she physically was very attractive, but her mental state was very unconfident, and otherwise just she never had that going on where she was sexy, I guess. So I think sexy often has less to do about appearances and a lot to do about behavior and mental disposition. So I think that you can have one without the other.
That's for sure. Yeah, I've noticed, I guess, in my own observation of humanity, is that women tend to feel sexy when they know that somebody has a strong desire to sleep with them. Whereas they feel beautiful when she knows that she's radiating what she would say in her mind is a positive aesthetic into her environment, right? It's
Yes.
like, oh, my heels match my blouse, and I love that, and it just is so beautiful. But there's a difference when she sees a guy who's coming on to her and she starts to get the tingles.
Right. So let's camp out here for a second, because I think this is probably the area of the post where I saw initially a couple things that I may have worded differently. So before getting to that real quick, so I think that women in the church do the beautiful part. So feeling pretty, being radiant, positive aesthetic, that sort of thing, because it's all very safe to do. And you notice it because that's the stuff they talk about, and it's the stuff that guys don't notice. Guys don't notice that their heels match their necklace. No guy that I know of who's straight really pays that close of attention to what a woman's wearing. And so women will talk about those things, and it's mostly they're talking about other things that women would notice. And that's the whole like feeling beautiful, feeling aesthetic, that sort of thing. I think the feeling sexy is when they feel like the parts of the body that cause arousal, their boobs, their butt, their hips, the things that they are talking about then tends to be somewhat taboo in the church to talk about, even among women. I remember my wife, she was working out a bunch, and she was really excited about some progress that she'd made building her booty. And she mentioned it to some of her church friends, and they were kind of like put off by it. Why would you want to do that? Isn't that kind of worldly? Isn't that kind of fleshy? It was kind of the vibe that they gave off to her. And so I think that was her feeling sexy, but that gets kind of poured water on. We want to put a damper on that fire in the church.
Right.
Whereas you can be as beautiful as you want, and the church is going to say, yeah, you go, girl.
Correct. And there's, I love referencing this story that John Eldredge wrote. Not that I'm a big John Eldredge fan on the whole, but he and his wife co-wrote this book called Captivating, which does have some points to be made. But he tells this story in one of it about this banquet that he goes to, and that there is this 90-year-old woman who walks through the double doors in this gown, and everybody just kind of stops and stares at her as she walks in, and that she just radiated this beauty, right? And I have no doubt, and I have seen them myself, these people like a 90-year-old woman who is going to radiate that beauty, and you can see and feel like, oh my goodness, this, she's gorgeous even at her age. But that doesn't mean I'm going to want to sleep with her, right?
Right. Levi would, and I'm going to make fun. This is going to be the make fun of Levi episode, because he can't talk back right now because he's having audio problems. So, yep, that's Levi's type.
So he's got a guilt thing going on, huh?
I don't think he knows we're making fun of him. Can't wait till he listens back on this recording.
Oh, we'll see if he does.
Yeah, right. I think that's a good point, though. I think that beauty is somewhat timeless. I think that obviously there's a thing about beauty fading to a degree as time goes on, but I think really has more of referencing that sexual appeal.
Correct. So now, obviously, I can't resist in all of this, but when we talk about how if a woman feels sexy, she's more likely to want to have sex, and if she feels, like she's not good at sex or not a sexy person, she's going to be less inclined to have sex. There's two thoughts that this prompts into me. The first one is, does that mean that the man's objective should be to go around and do everything he can to make his wife feel as sexy as possible?
No.
Why not? Because I agree.
Because you have more important things going on, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it shouldn't be your main objective. I think that you should encourage the things that you enjoy in her, and she's probably going to want to continue to do those things. But it's not my goal to do everything I can to make my wife feel a certain way, because I can't control her feelings.
Well, desire cannot be negotiated, and sexiness is part of the desire loop, really. So you can encourage her to a point, but it's got to come from her. And if she wants it, she's going to work on it herself. And she's going to do a much better job than if you try to coerce it. Because then it becomes, for most people, it becomes a covert contract anyway.
Yeah, well said. So the second point that I would want to make on this, and this is the part that I really can't resist because it's in my nature, I have to, right? So just as a woman who feels sexy is going to be more inclined to have sex and one who doesn't is going to be less inclined, does that not hold true to the person who in Christ is going to be trying to engage in spiritually reproductive acts, right? I've seen constantly people who don't evangelize and their excuse is, well, I'm just not very good at it. It's not my thing. That's not who I am. And right. And if they have this negative attitude about their spiritual reproductive role with Christ, then they're not going to engage in that activity either. Whereas those who have a very encouraging evangelistic experience are going to be far more inclined to say, oh yeah, spiritual reproduction, that's my thing, I'm totally with it. They're going to be doing it all the time because that confidence and that self-assurance that Christ as our groom validates us with when we see fruit flowing from our lives is something that's going to push us forward. So I always try to bring back to a biblical concept, right? To be able to make sure that we're keeping track with not just how our physical marriage is going, but how are our spiritual lives pursuing in the right direction.
Well,
yeah, I think with anything,
both
people
subjects.
Whoa.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think just with anything, people are more inclined to continue on in a behavior or an activity that they feel competent or especially skilled at. So it's one of those kind of catch-22 situations where to get to that point, you have to do it a bunch and get out there and try. It's part of the reason why in the manosphere you hear just approach, make tons and tons of approaches, and you'll get comfortable doing it. And eventually you'll start having fun doing it and feel competent doing it. And then you're kind of unstoppable because you just keep doing it because it's, you've moved beyond the point of it being a chore and you've actually gotten good enough at it that you enjoy it. And so I think similarly with evangelism or sharing the gospel or talking to random strangers, it's challenging at first if you've never done it, but the more you do it, the more you become competent at it. And because of that competence, you have a degree of confidence, which then makes it enjoyable.
Right.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is it creates a positive feedback loop. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, definitely. And the more you want to do it.
So I'm going to go ahead and just pull out one point I was going to make here on the post, because it says, so a woman feels sexy when she knows someone has a desire to sleep with her. I call this the 1980s movie boombox effect. So a woman feels sexy when she knows that not someone has a strong desire to sleep with her, but someone who is a high status or otherwise desirable person wants to sleep with her. Because the 80s movie with the guy out there with the boombox, it just so happens that he is, really handsome. And so she's all swooning over him. But same guy with the fedora and the neck beard, and he posts too much on Reddit, and she goes, I need to call the police immediately.
For the record, John Cusack was my favorite actor growing up. Not necessarily for that movie, but he was a fun guy to watch.
Extra credit on the quiz at the end. Trivia fact.
Yes. But I completely agree, and you're right. There's, like I say, the entire sidebar probably needs to be rewritten at some point. No, I don't have the time to redo that at any point right now. If anybody wants to contribute and take a post and rewrite it, and it is better than what I have on there right now, by all means, I will let you take over. I know that early in RPC's history, with the 203 post, I believe it was, on lifting, somebody else said, I'm really confident at this, what you have is good. I think what I can write is better. He was right. I put it in there, right? And if you can do the same, that, whether it's you guys here on the call, I'm talking more to the broader community, by all means, write sidebar worthy content and we will put it up, and I will even replace the 100, 200, 300, 400 series with any of your content if it passes that quality test. But yes, that is a shameless plug for wanting higher quality content on RPC. Not that we don't have it, but that we could always use more of it.
We don't ego lift and we don't ego post. How about that?
Right. And I'm wrong about a lot of things I post, by the way. I've mentioned that before, and I put that to the test recently. And I made it in the comments, with my spiritual growth musings that I put as one of my posts. I don't know that anything I was saying was actually spot on accurate that I want people to learn from, but I'm kind of putting an idea out there as if it's true, waiting for the community to immunize me and correct me and say, okay, that's what I was missing. That's where I went wrong. So I'm always open to the idea of correction and reproof.
So kind of the next part of the post that you had here that's, I think, worth discussing is, so you had written that one of the most powerful libido stimulating factors for a woman is believing that she is irresistibly sexy to the point that people will fight for or even against her. I dare say this is even stronger when coming from her husband. Why? Because most women like being reaffirmed that they have made good decisions. If the attention is coming from the outside the marriage, this creates minor insecurity that she made a bad decision in marrying her husband. But if it's coming from her husband, she is affirmed that she married the right guy. This increases attraction. What do we make of that?
I wrote it, so I'm going to refrain from commenting. Levi, is your microphone working again?
He's muted. I don't even think he can hear us.
No, he's probably gaming or something important.
Right.
Maybe you can hear that.
He's watching TV.
The sly little smile.
Oh, he's trying to talk to us.
We have no audio.
We can't hear you. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and kind of put some thoughts out here then. So I think that there is a degree of truth here in the sense that if the husband is somebody that she's attracted to, then it's certainly reaffirming that she made a good decision if he's attracted to her, and expressing that through initiation, being willing to push through some last minute resistance. I'm too tired. I don't feel good, whatever else, or whatever the excuse is, pushing through that. And, oh, he still wants me. I must be really sexy. And it definitely has, I think, a valuable component and part to play in that. I do think that being validated outside of the marriage and getting more objective feedback can also be beneficial both for the man and the woman, right? I think that, here's a good example. I was walking to the store not that long before this call, and somebody driving by, some lady catcalled me. And it was stupid. It didn't mean anything. But at the same time, I had just smashed my PR for reps for bench press just, 20 minutes ago. And I thought, you know what, that's pretty cool. That was affirming. And so I think that getting some of that unsolicited but more objective sort of feedback can definitely add to the whole I feel sexy quota of sorts, and that can translate to more sexual energy in the bedroom as well, because if you feel like you are a sexy person, you can bring that to the table in the bedroom to your spouse, and it's not just because they find you sexy, but because you are objectively so. Right.
So do you guys have any problems when if somebody were to catcall your wife or, holler at her on the street or something like that? Because for some reason that's like this. Right. No, that's this big taboo that, you hear within the church. Oh, you shouldn't have anybody thinking that way of you, because if they're thinking that way, then that means you're not being modest enough.
You should draw your sword from your scabbard and challenge them to a duel to the death for your maiden's honor. Chivalry, my friends, chivalry. How dare you suggest otherwise?
No, I always remember, I'm pretty confident it was Dave Chappelle, who was doing a comedy sketch on that once. And he says, so many guys get so hung up when another guy is staring at his wife's rack. And I'm thinking to myself, there couldn't be any greater compliment. My wife has a great rack. Yes, she does have a good rack, sir. Thank you for noticing. And yes, that is my rack too. It's just hysterical how he was able to bring that out and kind of flip the modern narrative of, oh goodness, you should be so offended if anybody looks at your wife that way. When in reality, and I've told the story before about how when I went on my very first date with my wife, and I make this totally ridiculous comment to her about, oh man, all these people seeing us must think, how did a guy like him get a girl like her? And I'm thinking I'm being sweet and romantic, and in her mind she's saying, excuse me, please don't ever say anything like that again. I want people to think that I'm with a good guy, not a schmuck. And so there's something to that concept.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, and this is something that I think might be lost a lot on church-going dudes because of the concept out there that I think is misapplied of humility, is I think one of the early components of Red Pill kind of starting points is don't put yourself down, don't make self derogatory comments, and I think that that's part of that. because if you make self-deprecating comments, you are actually saying, yeah, my wife made stupid choices because, yeah, I'm a schmuck, as you said. And so I think that's an important thing, that if you're a guy out there and you're trying to figure this whole, sexual relations with your wife and all of the husband-wife stuff out, that's a great place to start if you're not already doing it. Catch yourself when you're making self-deprecating comments and just knock it off, because I'll promise you this, they add no value to the conversation. Never do they add value to the conversation.
They not only add no value, they are an extreme display of low value. They're extreme because people not only perceive them as you're joking, but people don't make those kind of self-deprecating comments without there being some grain of truth there, and so they know it. And so it kind of confirms that you're on the low end when you do stuff like that. And it's just not good at all.
Yeah, and let me clarify. It's not that you never make fun of yourself, because there's a part of that is a good move to make at times, not taking yourself too seriously, showing that you're nonchalant, that you don't, that you're outcome independent. All of that is true. But those are, I wouldn't say advanced moves, but if you can't stop making actual self-deprecating comments about yourself, you should just go cold turkey until you can figure out how to do it the right way. If for example, I'm tall and I'll make funny comments about myself being short because it's completely not true and people understand that. It's more of an ironic statement than it is an actual self put down. And so similarly, pick your attribute, whatever. It can be done in a way that's funny, but most of the time it's done in a way that's cringy and horrible. So just stop until you can figure out how to do it right.
Right. It falls into the category of STFU until your frame is there to be able to make it work for you. So one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, early on in RPC's history, when I was writing a lot of this sidebar series, I had in my head that most of the guys who were coming to RPC were people who were from MRP, which is, I'm sure you guys can tell, the difference between TRP and MRP is immaculate, right? It's major, it's huge. And you can see a vast maturity difference between the typical incel complainer who, just ends up coming to TRP, hating on women and, saying screw the world, and a lot of them end up going MGTOW. And then the MRP guys who are saying, oh, no. We're not here just to complain and fight and whine about the world. We actually want to understand what we're doing and apply it. And there's a lot of maturity in that. And since a lot of our guys were initially coming from MRP, I had in my head that the majority of our original user base was very mature. And so when I'm writing things like, one of the most powerful libido stimulating factors for women is believing that she's irresistibly sexy to the point that people will fight for her or against her. I dare say it's even stronger when coming from her husband. I'm assuming that the guys I'm talking to are already attractive guys who have been at the MRP game for a while. As I've gotten later into seeing, especially since RPC has boomed, right? At the time I was writing this, there might have been 100 subscribers, being at over 6,700 at this point. That's not true of most people anymore. And our user base has definitely changed. And I don't say that as an insult to our user base, but as a motivation is a lot of the things that you're reading are meant to work in the context of a guy who's already started figuring his life out. You really have to go back to the basics if you're not there yet.
Well, and that's the most common problem I see is that people, though they're well-meaning because they want to move ahead, they're moving ahead too quickly and they're not getting the basics down before they try to move on to the advanced stuff. And without the building blocks of all the material that we suggest and learning it and at least getting familiar with it before you try to move on, at least trying to put some of it into practice in your own life, you're going to think it's working, and then you're going to get a bunch of weird comments to something you said on there, and you're going to be like, well, I thought I understood this stuff. Why is everybody why is everybody telling me I'm wrong? And without going through the material for a while, you don't really see it. So that's one thing I would just reassure everybody is spend time in the basics. Look, it took me a while to get a lot of this stuff, and I'm still learning every day. I don't know it all. Sometimes I'm wrong too. And I spent a lot of time on the basics. There was stuff that I just had to beat into my head over and over and over because it just did not come naturally to me, and I didn't catch it the first, second, or even the third time around reading it sometimes.
Right.
Yeah,
So when I recite, good.
I just want to emphasize how important that is. I really can't bold, italicize, underscore that statement enough. Get the basics right. So I was teaching a buddy of mine to shoot pistols the other day over the weekend. And if you've ever shot guns, most guns are pretty simple. I mean, I'm oversimplifying things, but pistols tend to be most technical. I am not a great shot by objective standards. I am better than like 3/4 of the people that I have ever shot with. And part of the reason is because I took a long time. I took classes. I figured out the fundamentals and the basics, and I'm still practicing those basics constantly. And so just figuring out your draw takes a lot of practice and time. So I was trying to teach my buddy how to do that, and he immediately just started pulling the gun out and pointing it basically. And, oh, I see what you're doing. I'm like, no, there's like 5 steps to this. You kind of want to practice these things independently, and it'll make you a better shot down the road. And he gets blowing through all 5 steps. It's like the guy in the gym who wants to squat. And so he loads up a bunch of weight and he sits down and he stands back up. Oh, cool. I sat down and I stood back up. Let me add some more weight. Never learning that there's actually a lot more technical stuff going on at that point. And so eventually you hit this plateau where you blow up and have some horrible injury or you shoot yourself. And so in a similar fashion with these basics, it's always worth revisiting and practicing these basics because that is the foundation the rest of it falls on. And so if you don't have it right, you're eventually going to blow up and you're going to injure yourself or others along the way. So to Patrick's point, it is really worth studying the basics. I go back regularly and read old posts that I've saved along the way just as a refresher because I'll think I have this thing nailed down and I'll go, oh, actually, I saw this before, but I didn't think about it in this way. And it can be super helpful.
Right, and that's the same thing that we see that causes, I would say, a lot of young believers to fall away, right? When we're getting guys who are early in the faith and they start trying to practice things saying, well, the people in the Bible were able to touch somebody and heal them, and so I should be able to hop out on the street and just pray over somebody and they're healed. And I've met countless young Christians, especially when you get into certain denominations, who think that that's how it works, and then they go in and it fails, and then they conclude, oh, well, the Bible must not be true. Right, when in reality they're trying to do things that, and I know everybody has a different opinion on that. I can't remember, but I think you said before you're a cessationist, so I'm sure I'm barking down the wrong path for this one. But more to the generic idea is that some people are trying to do things that are more advanced into the faith before they've even learned the basics of how do I pray, how do I read the Bible and actually know that I'm coming to some semblance of truth rather than my own personal interpretation of things, right? And there's all kinds of things that go wrong. And so what I always tell people is no matter what you're doing, anytime you start in any form of discipleship relationship, start with the basics and master them. And even if you think that you are mature, always go back to those because it's not like you can go through, and I put up on the 300 series, right? The quiet time, prayer, scripture memory, all of those things. And they're there for a reason. And I've told people before, if I could have rewritten the sidebar the way that I really wanted to, I would have put the 300 series first, because getting the basics in your spiritual life down is really the foundation that's going to pave the rest of the way for you to be able to understand the rest of the content. And in reality, if you can get the basics of following the Bible and understanding what it means, you're going to figure out everything else from the 100 and 200 series anyway, because you're going to read the Bible and know what it says and how to interpret it correctly and not fall for all of the traps that blue pill churchianity tries to push in your face. But no matter what you do, you can't say, okay, well, I've mastered how to have a daily quiet time and how to pray, so I don't need to do those anymore, so I'm going to start focusing on these other more advanced concepts of the faith. It just doesn't work that way. Always back to the basics.
Yep. You're right. I am a cessationist. I'm not going to take that bait right now, though.
Sure, fair enough. Yep. So I have a corollary too that I have a section on in this post as well, which is your wife needs to know that she is so irresistible that you will fight through any barrier to get in her panties, even barriers that she herself puts up, right? And so this is what I'm referencing here is probably a more palatable way for believers to hear the phrase of anti-slut defense. Anybody want to dive into that concept?
Well, I think it's kind of a matter of last-minute resistance to a degree, and I think it ends up being another one of those tests, right? Does he really want me? Am I really that sexy? Is it you just he's horny, or is it because he wants me? And you kind of put that in your post there. And the answer
Right,
might be
and that's
both,
the whole
but I think
last
that's
part of the
test. Yep.
For reference, I'm not going to go into the last end of the post about the specifics of generic versus specific compliments and all that, because really that boils down to the question of, like you say, does he really want me or does he just want sex? But continue.
Yeah, so I think this is an area where I probably am maybe the wrong person to weigh in on this, because you can kind of size a person up a little bit if they have this very, especially a woman, when I was single looking for a wife, if I had this feeling that the idea of sluttiness was an absolute taboo turn off, could never think about myself in that light, I wasn't interested, because that old true adage of, I don't remember who originally said it, but a lady in the street but a freak in the sheets. That's what I wanted. And the thing is, like, if you can't get into that headspace at all at any point under any conditions, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And so I selected carefully for people that I was interested in going on dates with, that I could see based on their behavior that there would be a circumstance in which they could get into that headspace. And I think that this is a very challenging situation in the church, where women grow up hearing any type of desire for sex is basically a sin, so you should do everything you can to repress that, and you end up with all kinds of weird damage done to their libido and their own self-image around themselves as a sexual person. So all that being said, I think that if a woman has these moments of, well, I'm not really feeling it, that might be true. They might actually have a headache. They might actually have, something going on. But if you're an attractive guy and you push beyond that, no, I really want you, you're so, sexy, I'm so turned on, that can go a long ways. And they'll be like, okay, now I'm kind of turned on because he's that into me.
All right, how many guys here have ever had a headache and thought, oh my goodness, I got a headache. That means that's the last thing I would ever want is sex right now.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny because it's kind of back to like the whole thirsty thing. If you're dying of thirst, then any type of liquid is going to seem like it's the best thing you've ever tasted in your whole life. But if you've already been satiated, then you'll be a little bit more selective. I think there's a degree of that can happen. I'll put it plainly. I'm very slow, or very seldom will I pass up on those things. I tend to be pretty prolific in that department, but there have been circumstances in which I felt enough like shit that I didn't want to go there, because it was going to be more trouble and pain than it was worth. It's been very rare, though. Probably count on one hand.
That sounds fair.
Yeah, same here. But being the oldest of the bunch here, I can tell you this: with the kind of work I do and the hours I put in, and right now the extreme heat, yeah, there's nights I come home and I'm just like, yeah, forget it. Okay, if she really wants it, hey, convince me. But nah, we're both pretty much of the same mind most of the time, and I'm definitely coming at it from the same perspective that Oz is. I'm very satisfied. My wife never says no. Really, never says no. She was very timid and just shy as far as that subject when we met. But yeah, we went through the Bible. We looked at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. She couldn't believe that was in there. She hadn't really read her Bible too much. And, she was surprised, took it to heart. And, well, part of it was I laid out my expectations before marriage really clearly. And she said, you marry me, there'll never be a problem. And never has been.
So let me bring up another concept that we've alluded to without saying it in so many words, is the Madonna-whore complex, right? Which, as far as I understand it, is when either a man or a woman has this view of the woman in the relationship as being either the good girl or the dirty slut. And so if you have this girl who has or if a guy has a wife who is the goody church girl, and she's grown up very pure, chaste, wore a purity ring all through high school and all of those things, right? And then they try to have a fruitful sex life, he can just never bring himself to think that she might want that dirty sex life, that, to be able to do these fun, engaging things, because, oh my goodness, she's too pure for that. Or in the other alternative is the reverse, is where he marries somebody who is perhaps looser than the church girl. And, he views her that way, but then never has the ability to see her as the type of girl that he would want to mother his children. And so with that kind of a Madonna-whore complex, and how a lot of guys really struggle being able to engage with their wives sexually because they have that psychological hang up, how would you guys handle that? And I know we've got, I think, literally 4.5 minutes left. So let's try to do in 4.5 minutes what I'm sure Freud had tried spending years of his life figuring out.
I would say it's a mindset change in the man. Really, you're the person that is responsible for making that happen. It's something in your mind, in your makeup, in your hang-ups that you have to pray about, and you have to dig down deep within yourself, and you have to decide, how bad do I really want this? Because the more you want it, the easier it's going to be to overcome. At least, the desire will be there. It may take some practice, but I think that's the main thing right there.
But what if even the wife reinforces that view of herself by every time he tries to overcome that mental block in his head, she continues to, exude the purity culture coming out of her with the way that she conducts herself even in the marriage bedroom?
Well, that's where dread comes in. The dread is very healthy, and you got to get yourself out of the house. You got to go places, and if you're taking care of yourself and improving yourself and being the best you can be, you're going to get attention. She's going to see it. And it's going to flip a switch inside of her at some point.
So I'm going to come at it a little bit differently. First of all, I'm going to start with pragmatism. If you're a single dude and you're vetting women and thinking about having a wife down the road, it is much, I think, more preferable to find a woman who is on the side of maybe overly pure, maybe more Madonna than more whore, and to try and draw out her inner sex beast than it is to do the opposite and try and turn a hoe into a housewife. Prob's not going to happen, fam. Don't do it. So given that, I think that there is a lot of messaging that goes on that negatively affects a woman who grew up in the church or wants to present herself well in that context from embracing her inner slutty side. So think about what your own messaging is. If you see the e-thought going around showing her, tids and bits everywhere, what are you saying about that? Are you like making negative comments about how whorish she is or something like that, or what a great sinner she is? Like, one, your wife probably doesn't need to hear that. She probably has those thoughts herself. Second of all, you can message that more appropriately or like more helpful to your own ends, right? Like, yeah, she's attractive. Too bad she doesn't have a husband to use that on, so that's not discouraging that from your wife behaving. Because what your wife is often going to do is she's going to say, okay, what does he think of women who do these behaviors? And she's going to think back on her mental record of what you've said or done about those type of contexts, and she's going to default to whatever that is. And so if you're constantly putting, women who are behaving a certain way down, it's more likely that she's not going to engage in that behavior because she doesn't want to be on the receiving end of that put down either. Right.
So what would you make of the phrase, and I think, Patrick, this might actually have been you who had said this at one point, is you can take a sexy woman and make her godly, but you can't take a godly woman and make her sexy.
That wasn't me that said it.
Not you. Okay.
I took a godly woman and I made her sexy.
Got it. Because I've heard people make that claim before. And I know we've only got 1 minute, but some kind of comment would be nice.
My comment, and I'll leave it at this, either way you have work to do, and you're not going to pull it off without good frame. So first of all, you need to develop strong frame because she will adopt the framework that you set out for her if you have framework to set out for her, and she'll follow into it. So, you can go either direction, but it's going to be work. So make sure you're equipped to do that work.
Okay.
Well, there's only a certain amount of change that any person can do in any given period of time. So you have to know where you're starting at, and depending on your efforts and your frame and your enthusiasm,
15 seconds, Patrick.
You're going to be able to move the needle so much, but it's going to depend on where you're starting from.
All right. It's been a pleasure chatting, guys. We'll catch you all next week.
Later.
See ya.